So recently tremendous inroads have been made into the targeting of FLT3 in acute myeloid leukemia. As we know, FLT3 mutations, in particular internal tandem duplication mutations, are associated with a poor prognosis and are relatively common in acute myeloid leukemia. The first generation of these inhibitors was relatively inactive, but more potent inhibitors came along, such as Quizartinib, but these were rather vulnerable to resistance-conferring mutations. Encouragingly, Gilteritinib has been developed as a next generation FLT3 inhibitor that is very potent and very active, including against the most common activation loop mutations which confer resistance to Quizartinib. These are known as D835 mutations. So in this study, the question was, if you treat patients with Gilteritinib, what are the mechanisms of acquired resistance, loss of response? And approximately 25 patients were analyzed in this through a variety of means, including cytogenetic and molecular profiling. And these patients had either progressed following initial response to Gilteritinib or had not responded at all. The majority had had the former, so failure to respond altogether was relatively uncommon. But what was noted cytogenetically was clonal evolution in a good proportion of the patients. So there were 9 cases that were noted to have clonal evolution, including 5 of these that occurred at the time of progression. And interestingly, one of these developed a Philadelphia chromosome translocation, which is more commonly associated, of course, with chronic myeloid leukemia, but is potentially targetable. The other 4 patients had actual clonal abnormalities detected while they were responding, and more work needs to be done to see whether these were actually early in the phase of eventual progression. And one of the most interesting findings was what happens to FLT3 and what happens in other genes associated with hematologic malignancies at the time of relapse. And in actually 11 out of the 25 cases, there was evolution of a new somatic mutation in one of these genes. So mutations in FLT3 occurred at F691, which is known to be resistant, leucine substitutions at this position are known to be resistant to lower doses of Gilteritinib. It may be possible to override these with higher doses. That remains to be seen. I'd say the most noteworthy finding was the finding of mutations in the RAS pathway in a number of cases, which suggests to me that if you put enough pressure on FLT3 and you prevent it from mutating, you're going to unfortunately select for mutations in the RAS pathway. These may be targetable with downstream inhibitors of downstream mediators of RAS, but again, that I think is probably going to be an area of future investigation.